Good evening. Thank you all for coming here. So it's my great pleasure to introduce the Governor of the Banque de France, François Villeroy de Galhau. François has been Governor of the Banque de France since 2015. And then before that, he had many different jobs, both in the private sector and the public sector. In the public sector, he was an advisor to the finance minister, to the prime minister of various governments in France in the 1990s. Then he worked in the private sector for a long time. He was essentially running the retail operations of BNP Paribas. And then he came back to the public sector to be the governor of the Banque de France. Now, I think it's very important to, in the context of this conference, to emphasize that the Banque de France today is very different from what it was 20 years ago. And there are two major changes. One happened 20 years ago, that was the birth of the euro. The other one happened 10 years ago, that was the financial crisis. So because of that, essentially, François has three jobs, if you think about it. So one is the governor of the Banque de France, with all the things that come with it. He's also a member of the governing council of the European Central Bank, because since we created the euro, what that means is that now all the decisions regarding monetary policy are taken at the Eurozone level, not at the French level. So there is a governing council for the central bank. And then since the financial crisis, most countries around the world have also started thinking harder about how to manage financial risks, which means that most countries have some form of a financial stability board. Okay? And usually, although not always, the head of this institute is the central bank governor. So in France, it's like that. So François is also the head of the systemic risk board in France, whose job it is to essentially avoid a repeat of 2008 by spotting the risks before they materialize. So he kind of has three jobs now. And I hope that keeps him busy. So this is the official...
yes, it is.
I'm sure. So that's the official introduction that gives you a sense of what he does. I just want to finish on a more personal note, which is that I also had the chance in 2012 to be advising the finance minister in Paris in the midst of the Eurozone crisis, at a time where unemployment was rising, spreads were high, the stock markets was crazy, and nobody was happy. No matter what we did, things got from worse to worse. And believe me, when you are like in the meetings either with the president or with the prime minister or the finance minister in these circumstances, it's pretty hard and it's pretty depressing after a while because you feel like you're trying your best and things don't improve. Now you might hope eventually they will, but you're not quite sure. And so when our team felt really down and depressed, we said, we need to bring somebody who's going to give us some perspective. And you guessed it, the person we called was François, who at that time was not governor of the Banque de France, but we called on him because of his background and his experience in the public sector. And I can tell you one thing, he's a wonderful cheerleader. That is to say that he's very realistic, so he's going to tell you things the way they are, but on the other hand, he has fundamentally an optimistic perspective on things. And this is exactly what we needed at that time. And it turns out, of course, he was right. So the euro did not collapse, and then unemployment is going down. So things eventually play out the way we hoped. So now the floor is yours, I guess, and Kim is going to moderate. Thank you so much for coming.
Dear Thomas, dear Professor Schoenholz, dear Kim, dear Governor King, dear Mervyn, dear students. It's really my pleasure and honor to be in NIU tonight. Dear Thomas, thank you for your kind words, two kind words, I must confess. Can I add that both sides of the Atlantic, including my home country and your home country, France, benefit from your skills in economics. And Thomas used to be a member of our supervisory board in what we call ACPR, which is our supervisor I chair. You students, the high quality education you receive here at the NIU Stern Business School will give you the tools to understand and address global challenges. In my short introductory remarks today, I promise to be short, Kim, I will address one of these global challenges, the current European slowdown. And I would like to quickly elaborate on three apparent paradoxes. The first one is that the causes of the slowdown are mainly outside the euro area, but its effects are very acute on the region's biggest economy. Second, the recent monetary policy controversy is of little interest for the future. And third paradox, the euro area has more policy rooms than others in the non-monetary domain, but underuses it. Let me start with the causes of the slowdown. They are mainly external to the euro area. Uncertainty is undoubtedly the most important. This uncertainty is mostly man-made and must also be fixed by man. Due to the escalation of trade tensions, we are witnessing a global slowdown, very significant in global trade. You see it on this slide. In its latest World Economic Outlook, published yesterday, the IMF, as a consequence, expects the slowest global growth with 3% since 2008-2009. The loss of global growth due to the trade war could reach up to 0.8% next year, due mainly to its indirect effects, I stress this, beyond tariffs: fall in business confidence and investment, decrease in productivity. Similarly, the twists and turns of Brexit have created volatility in UK quarterly growth and weighed on business investment. May I only add that on Brexit we are all waiting for the latest news. Despite this gloomy context, the French economy is resilient, with growth at 1.3%, close to its potential. Purchasing power per capita should accelerate sharply this year, 2.3%, due to the strength of labor income. 1 million jobs have been created in France over the past 4 years, and due to the fiscal stimulus. But as a whole, the euro area is acutely affected, primarily due to the weight of Germany, with German growth of only 0.4% expected this year. Of course, Germany is highly specialized in the manufacture of capital goods and overexposed to global trade. German exports account for around 50% of its GDP. Combined with the radical upheaval of the car industry, this phenomenon nearly constitutes an asymmetric shock for the German economy. And this brings me to my second paradox about the recent monetary policy controversy, which is, as I said, of little interest for the future. Over the past few years, monetary policy has played its full part in helping Europe weather the storm. Let me play today a warm tribute to the captain of our vessel, Mario Draghi, as his term soon comes to an end. Thanks to his leadership, we protected our most valuable asset, the euro, and kept our monetary union together. Thanks to his unswerving determination and readiness to do whatever it takes, we are still all on board. During his mandate, the euro system has deployed a supportive and innovative monetary policy strategy. Over the past 5 years, the ECB has experimented with a variety of unconventional policy instruments, and it has arguably gone later, but further into the toolbox than the Fed or the Bank of England. And the different instruments can influence different parts of the yield curve. This policy has been effective in supporting the recovery in the euro area since 2013. The recent memorandum of the so-called old guard apparently missed some positive outcomes of the last years. Let me remind them. Estimates of the effectiveness of the unconventional monetary policies have a broad range. but they are in the order of 2.5 percentage points on growth and 1 to 1.5 percentage points on inflation over the period 2015-18. This is significant. In times of heightened uncertainty, the recent strengthening of our forward guidance, which is now strongly state-based, demonstrate our determination to reach our inflation target. Let me quote it precisely. We now expect rates to remain at their present levels of minus 0.5% for the DFR all over until the inflation outlook robustly converges to a level sufficiently close to but below 2%, which is our inflation aim. Besides, this strengthening of our forward guidance implies the consequent prolongation of the reinvestment period for the very important stock of QE assets, 2.6 trillion euros. The tiering system, which we decided last September, will help us mitigate the possible side effects that negative rates might have on banks' profitability, which is crucial to protect the transmission of our monetary policy through the bank lending channel. Let me stress it. The Governing Council discussion at the start of September is now behind us. Everyone has expressed themselves legitimately. I have explained my own reservation on one part of the package. But the decisions were taken, and taken equally legitimately, and they provide clarity well into the future. Have no doubt, we are committed, and the whole package will be implemented. We must now look resolutely forward with 3 strong elements of consensus around Mario Draghi today and around Christine Lagarde tomorrow. First, we have to maintain an accommodative monetary policy in the face of the economic slowdown and low inflation. Second, a review of our monetary policy framework in this environment will be very welcome. And third, it is very desirable that fiscal policy now prolongs this monetary support wherever that is possible in Europe. It is time to turn the page and turn to the future. Having said that, this brings me to my third and last paradox about the fact that the euro area has more policy room than others in the non-monetary domain, but underuses it. Monetary policy can no longer be the only game in town. Central banks, including even the ECB, cannot perform miracles. This paradox is either painful or promising, or both. The euro area has more leeway than the US or the UK, but until now has been much less inclined to use it. And this has 2 dimensions. The euro area has first a lower level of public debt. You see it with 85% of GDP, lower than in the US, 104%, or even the UK, 87%. It has the lowest sovereign interest rates, even often negative, but it uses fiscal stimulus significantly less. It should now exploit its fiscal leeway where available, especially in Germany, to support cyclical stabilization and long-term growth. There is also room to increase wages in countries which have full employment and external surpluses. And it is essential to choose quality expenditures. Let me stress this qualitative dimension, which is often a blind spot of the debate in our democracies, starting with investment. In this respect, I welcome the announced creation of a Dutch investment fund targeted to projects in infrastructure, digital, or climate transition. its magnitude could be up to 7% of Dutch GDP. This is food for thought if we transpose this order of magnitude at the European level. One word about private debt, which stands, you see it on the right, at about 119% of GDP. It is also significantly lower in the euro area compared to the US, UK, or Japan. But of course, the lower for longer environment requires increased vigilance on financial stability. The IMF just stressed it in its latest radar, and you see this nice figure, in the Global Financial Stability Report published this morning. If you look at it, the present level of risk is the gray zone, and you compare it where it was in April, in blue, or in the last global financial crisis in red. As you see it, on both sides of the Atlantic, and this is the bottom left part of the radar, we should pay greater attention to non-banks and leveraged debt. We should not be shy of activating macroprudential tools, and we should go beyond the old separation principle between monetary policy and financial stability. It's not leaning against the wind, but I advocate a smarter coordination. Furthermore, and this is the second leeway, the euro area has an abundant resource at its disposal, a savings surplus towards investment of more than 300 billion euros. You see it on the left. The top priority on the European growth agenda should hence be a union for savings and sustainable investment to achieve two major objectives as proposed by the next CMU report published last week by the ECOFIN Council. First objective, offering saving products to serve citizens' needs and allocating capital to value-creating investments. Second objective, building and strengthening an integrating, competitive, deep and liquid European capital market. There is political consensus on that, but to achieve this, it is now high time to give the banking union and the capital markets union a significant push forward. Let us, at last, walk our talk. To conclude these introductory remarks, let me quote one of the founding fathers of the United States, Benjamin Franklin. We must indeed, Franklin said, all hang together, or most assuredly, we shall hang separately. Hanging together is exactly what we should aim for within Europe to build a more integrated union, and outside Europe to work on a renewed multilateralism. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Governor, for that excellent introduction. It's now my privilege to direct you to the mechanism by which you can all participate in this discussion. Up on the screen, you can see we're projecting the website slido.com, www.slido.com. If you would like to submit a question for the governor or to vote on any of the questions that are listed there, all you have to do is go to that website, join at number 2222, put that into your join list, and you have to provide your full name. We don't accept anonymous questions. Then you can submit a question and also vote on the other questions. Your votes matter. Generally, unless we unexpectedly run out of questions from the audience, we will be presenting the questions to the governor that you have submitted and you have voted on. I do have a backup list in case we somehow run out, but I doubt that will happen given the governor's excellent introduction. So,
am I allowed to vote myself?
You can vote. We have to get you a phone for doing that. So just to begin the process, the first question on the list happens to be by someone named Kim Schoenholz, and I promise I did not vote for this one. With interest, you mentioned how low interest rates are in the euro area, even negative at the ECB policy level. What are the channels by which monetary policy operates today in the euro area?
Perhaps first let me stress that it's a package. And as I said, we have now a broadened toolbox, and we are able to address the various maturities of interest rates from the short end to the long end. And I stress this dimension of complementarity because it's often understated. Second, I mentioned some figures about the efficiency of these measures. The main channel is the credit channel. I will precise it. But there is a debate about monetary policy, which is necessarily legitimate, as said. There are various estimates of the effects. But I would say that the magnitude is always significant, whether these estimates come from the ECB or national central banks or from outside, which is important. I gave the last estimate by the ECB, which is for the period 2015-2018, about 2.5 percentage points for growth and between 1 and 1.5 percentage points for inflation. Let me precise one thing. If I compare it with the other estimates, as just said, it's at the higher end on growth, this figure, and it's at the lower end on inflation. But just to give a magnitude. What is the main channel? It's obviously the credit channel. And the bank credit channel, as you are aware, and this is a very significant difference between the euro area economy and the US one. In the case of the euro area, 80% of corporate fundings goes through banking and 20% through capital markets. There are differences across countries. In my home country, France, it's 60-40% because we have a significant number of successful large corporates financed on capital markets. But as you know, these figures are completely the opposite in the US, about 1/3 banking channel, 2/3 capital markets. It means that for us and for the transmission of the monetary policy, the credit channel through banks is of utmost importance. And it works. We saw a significant decline of interest rates to corporates, including SMEs. We saw a significant decline of interest rates for mortgages, and this is a very significant part of economic activity. We also saw an acceleration of volume. If you look at the figures of credit before the adoption of unconventional monetary policy, so 2013, 2014, we still had a decrease in loans outstanding. And we had clearly a reversal after the unconventional monetary policy, so an efficient transmission of monetary policy.
Okay. I guess Thomas mentioned in his introduction that monetary policy today is made at the euro area level. So the question from Professor White is, what is the role played by national central banks in the euro system today?
The simplest answer would be probably to say that it's not that different from the Federal Reserve System in the US, with some differences I will elaborate upon. But let me precise that we have 19 member states in the euro area, which is an interesting figure, as a matter of fact. You are probably aware that at the start of the euro area, there were 12 member states. None of them left, including Greece, and it was painful for them, but it was a clear choice. And 7 new countries joined. So the 19 governors are around the table, and there are 90 national central banks. What is their role? First, it's a real federal system. So we play a significant role in the assessment of the economic situation and in the discussion. Then there is one single decision, and it's obviously what we need, and this is the purpose of the Governing Council and of the ECB board. Preparation, collective, discussion, single decision, and then implementation And again, the national central banks play the key role in the implementation in each economy of the common decisions. And believe me, it works very well. If I look at other European institutions, we all know that, and I speak in a federal country, but I will only speak for my side of the Atlantic. We all know that the relations between the center and the various states is a very sensitive issue. I would say, without risking being contested, that probably the ECB, or what we call the Euro system, ECB plus 19 member states, is the most efficient federal European institution. Obviously, when you belong in an NCB, you think that the ECB is too powerful. When you are in the ECB, you sometimes think that the NCBs are too decentralized, but believe me, it works. It works. And I think, perhaps a last consideration, Kim, if you allow me, I think this federal organization plays a role in the very strong political support we have for the euro. I don't know if you are aware of this figure, but it's often understated outside Europe. 76% of euro area citizens want to keep the euro as their currency. And the fact that in each country, in France, it's the Banque de France which is responsible to protect the euro, to implement it, to explain it, I think plays a role in the strong political support we have.
Let me just elaborate. Could you extend that to how financial stability goals are achieved? To what role do the national central banks have in dealing with financial stability issues?
This is a very important question, and Thomas was kind enough to say that I share the Financial Stability Board in France. It's the only point where, is Thomas still with us?
He's right there.
Okay, Thomas, if you allow me, it's the only point where I have to slightly precise what you said. This Financial Stability Board in France is shared by the minister. But I happen to be a member, and an important one, as I am the one, the only one, who has to propose macroprudential measures. So, in other words, it's a double key.
Okay.
I cannot decide the measures alone. We are 8 members in this Financial Stability Board, including 3 completely independent economists. We have to find a majority, and usually the minister is part of the majority, but I have to propose the measures, so it's a double key. But this is not precisely your question. Your question is more between the articulation of the European level and national level. Monetary policy is clearly decided at European level. For financial stability, we have a mixed system. For very simple reasons, that the evolutions can be different from a country to another. Let me quote 2 examples. If I look at real estate, the evolution of prices, of volumes, of the markets can be very different from a country to another country and within a country. If I take France, the prices of real estate is increasing very quickly in Paris and is more depressed in rural regions, for instance. So, for the bulk of macroprudential policies, the responsibility remains national, and I think it's appropriate. To give you another example, I mentioned the positive growth of credit outstandings in the euro area. We are now at an average at a bit more than 3%. But if I look at my home country, France, for various reasons, the growth of credit is double, more than 6%. So we introduced a counter-cyclical buffer, for instance, which is a typical macroprudential measure, which other countries didn't need to introduce. So this is the bulk of the responsibility, it is national. Having said that, we have a strong surveillance at euro area level. And to give you 2 tools we have, first, we publish a financial stability report each semester, and you can look at it, it's public. I think it's very serious work, published by the ECB in May and in November. And second, we have a European body called ESRB, European Systemic Risk Board, chaired by the chairman of the ECB, Mario Draghi today, Christine Lagarde tomorrow, we discuss, we monitor risk, we discuss, and the ESRB is able to top up national macroprudential measures if judged insufficient. I can elaborate more about the substance of financial stability later, but sure. This is just to answer on the institutional framework we have, and I think it's appropriate.
Great. You've highlighted, Governor, how successful the European governments have been in maintaining the viability of the euro, and you highlighted Mario Draghi's whatever it takes commitment. The question from Professor Wachtel is, what further steps does the EU need to take, governance, fiscal, regulatory, to ensure the long-term viability of the euro?
First, I think that the long-term viability of the euro is assured today, and I stress this question of political support. If you allow me to, it doesn't mean that we don't need further progress. Okay. I strongly call for further progresses. But if you look at this opinion polls figure, 81% of Germans want to keep the euro as their currency. This is not very well known, but it's probably the most important figure I will quote tonight. 70% of French citizens, a clear majority in each country, including Italy. And this plays a role that each time a political authority in the euro area has to choose, unfortunately, it's sometimes in a crisis. It's the way we manage our progresses. But each time a political authority, till now, in any of the 19 countries had to choose, they have chosen to stay in the euro and to strengthen the euro area. And it's not by chance. It's due to this political demand by their citizens. Having said that, we made many progresses during the last crisis, including the banking union. But we are not yet there. If I had to sum it up, I would say that there are two possible legs or two possible fields of progress. First is what I would call public risk sharing, and second is private risk sharing. Let me say one word about the public risk sharing. It's the idea of a common euro area fiscal capacity, strongly supported by the French government. To be frank, there was some progress, but not enough. And also on the public side, there was this very significant breakthrough, which was the creation of the so-called ESM, European Stability Mechanism, which has a very strong firepower. You are aware about that, more than 500 billion euros. It played a decisive role in managing the Greek, Portuguese, or Irish crisis with success. And there are some progresses, too limited in my eyes, of broadening the role of the ESM from ex-post crisis management to ex-ante crisis prevention. So this is the public part of the story, what I call public risk management. Some progress, but let us be frank, more difficult for political reasons. If I have one message today, in answer to your question, that we should not forget the private risk sharing. And this is, if, I know, now we see the question, but this was, can I show my slide again?
Let me see if I can go back. Hold on 1 second.
Is it possible?
I think so. Let me just make sure I can bring you back. Alt-Tab. Get that to it?
That's it.
There we
Thank
go.
you very much.
Pleasure.
As said, Europe has this tremendous resource of private savings as an access to investment, which is, in other words, its external surplus. We should use more efficiently this private savings to develop investment and innovation in Europe. And so we should channel this saving, which is on the left part in light blue, to the many investment needs and innovation needs we have. And everybody agrees we need to develop digitalization, we need to scale up our SMEs. If you look at these figures, this is a share of corporate equity to GDP. You see that it's much lower in the euro area than in the US, and we need, obviously, to finance energy transition. So there is no question about the purpose. And here there is political consensus. And the 19 governments would agree, and the 19 governors supported strongly the idea of a capital market union. The technical question is how we develop the channel from the resources to the investment needs. I don't want to be boring, but these are the various elements mentioned on this slide. The question is, and here I elaborate slightly, why didn't we make more progress on this issue? Because you can understand that on a euro area budget, there are political roadblocks. On the capital market union, there are none. There is political agreement, but the agenda is probably seen as very technical, and let me be clear, a bit boring. So we should make...
Not for a business school.
Not for a business school. No, I'm ready to speak about half an hour about the various contents, insolvency laws, venture capital, etc. But I won't. No, just to say that I think that it's time now, with this new commission, to push for a decisive technical agenda. It's about probably 10 measures in order to suppress all the borders obstacles we still have within the single market. We have a monetary union. We don't have a real single financial market yet. We have a banking union, but we don't have enough bank consolidations. And this is what I wrote at the bottom of this slide. I don't see huge obstacles, but I would wish that, as it was the case for the single market 30 years ago, you were not born yet. But let me remind you, Kim, if you remember, the single market was also technically extremely boring. 300 directives sponsored by the European Commission. At that time, the genius of Jacques Delors was to say, I won't speak to you about the 300 directives. This is a technical agenda. I will give you the purpose, the 4 freedoms: goods, services, capital, and people. And this is the way it went. He got political support for this purpose, and then the technical agenda went on. We can deliver this in the 5 years to come at the EU level. So this would be my wish. We have put much emphasis on the public risk-sharing part. Let us focus perhaps on the private risk-sharing, which is more technical, but at least as promising.
Great. Can I just put the questions back up so
yes,
that people...
sorry.
No, it's a problem. We got it? Done. Thank you. Okay, so the next question is a very frontier question for many central banks. Should central banks be creating digital currencies, and if so, under what circumstances?
It's a very trendy question, if I may. There are various triggers, probably, for this question. Let me remind you. First is Libra. And we'll see what happens with Libra. We did our duty as political authorities. France happens to chair this year the G7, so we created a dedicated task force the day after Libra announced its plan or its project in June. We'll see what happened, but we said very clearly that if Libra comes to a reality, it will have to comply with the highest regulatory standards, including anti-money laundering. This is obvious. Second, there is a decrease of cash, which is often a trigger for this debate about central bank digital currency. I don't know if you are aware that in Sweden, for instance, which has been at the forefront of this debate, cash is almost disappearing. And there is this simple idea that cash banknotes were a right of access of each of us as individual citizens to the central bank balance sheet. And if the banknote disappear, digital currency could be a substitute. A claim that each of us can have on the central bank. Let me stress that in many other countries, including this one, including most European countries, cash is diminishing, but cash is not disappearing. In the euro area, cash transactions in number are still 2/3 of total transactions. So there is no urgency, but there is a trend. And the third trigger is technology. Simply saying, you will see the development of digital payment means for wholesale. And this is probably an interesting point of stable coin, because everybody focused on Libra, but there are many stable coins projects which are wholesale, including very famous US banks, I will not quote any, but which are linked to the US dollar or to a basket of currency, and which are used for wholesale purposes in order to have instant payments 24/7. This is a very interesting challenge. We should think probably as central banks about a wholesale digital currency. And this could be a first priority. Then comes the question of a retail central bank digital currency, let me say Swedish type. Here it raises more questions, and we will have to study them also, including, to give an example, the interesting question of anti-money laundering. If each of us has an account with central bank digital currency at the Banque de France for French citizens, am I responsible for anti-money laundering on this account? It has to be studied. Another question, which has more consequences on financial policies and economic policies, does it mean that bank intermediation diminish or disappear if each of us has its private account at the central bank? Or will it be distributed through commercial bank, which is another possible scenario? So this raises many questions. Again, we should study them, probably separating the wholesale dimension and the retail dimension. Let me only stress, because this debate was very associated with Libra in the last month, that I think it would be more useful to separate these two debates. Libra raises specific questions, mainly questions about the efficiency of the cross-border payment systems, and we should improve this efficiency. Central bank digital currency could answer different needs.
Great, thank you. The next question is actually about Brexit. Yes, we have the former governor of the Bank of England here, but putting you on the spot, the question is really, what do you think the impact would be on the euro area in the event that Brexit occurs in a, quote, disorderly way?
First, obvious remark, we don't know yet.
Right.
And we all wish there could be a deal. So I will not comment on the last rumors. I'm not part of the negotiation. Let me express the wish that we can come to a deal on both sides of the channel. I think it would be good news for the British economy and for the euro area economy. To put it in other words, a disorderly Brexit would be bad news, first and foremost for the British economy, but also as a consequence for the European economy. I will not quote specific figures. You know that the Bank of England has published some estimates which are significant for the British economy. But one obvious remark is that probably the consequences will be very different from a sector to another sector, and in this sector, from company A to company B. So it's a bit difficult to predict what will be the macroeconomic outcome. It will be significantly negative. I would make the same remark on our side of the channel. The effects will be on a very broad spectrum, depending on the various companies. We have to prepare ourselves to a no-deal Brexit, and it's what we did. I will say very clearly that in the financial sector, we are ready for a disorderly Brexit. If ever it happens, the consequences will be negative, but much more limited on our side of the channel for an obvious reason. The number of customers we would lose is much smaller than the number of customers the UK economy would lose. Having said that, I strongly wish the next hours, the next days, the next weeks will be fruitful.
Great. I think you answered the next question that's on the list. You discussed the effect of low interest rates on certain aspects of financial stability. So we'll pass on that one. The policy rate. Oh, please.
If I may add one word, perhaps on substance.
Okay.
Because I answered on the responsibility and the governance. But if I look at the various financial institutions, we are very vigilant on the financial stability aspect. It's clear. And in this lower for longer environment, we still have to increase our vigilance. So we have the monetary policy hat, but we have also the financial stability hat. Let me say one quick word about bank, insurance, and asset managers. About banks, one key issue is a profitability in the euro area. And it's why we decided tiering, which is probably a good measure for financial stability. I don't know if you are aware about tiering. It's the idea that part of the excessive reserves of the banks will not be subject to the negative rate of minus 0.5. They will be at zero. So it preserves the negative effect, or it corrects part of the negative effects of negative rates on bank profitability. And I think this is a good example of what I call the coordination between monetary policy aims and financial stability. Second, on insurance, we look at the solvency. We all know that low long-term rates have mixed effects on insurance. They have capital gains, but they have also on the liability side an increase of the liabilities, which are very long, due to the diminution of the discount rate. So we monitor this. We have the advantage in Europe of having Solvency II. It's not very well known, perhaps, on this side. It's sometimes criticized on my side of the Atlantic. Solvency II is not very popular, but it's probably the best regulation worldwide. If you look at the IMF report, they support Solvency II in order to deal with this solvency monitoring. And third, asset managers. I showed the IMF radar about non-banks. It's here that probably we made less progress in the last decade. We enhanced bank regulation very significantly. There is an issue of bank profitability, we dealt with it, but if you look at bank solvency, it has been increased dramatically in the last 10 years. We enhanced insurance regulation. It's less the case for non-banks. So there is a risk, and we have to monitor it, that the asset management industry, in this environment of low rates, are subject to a search for yields and to more illiquid assets, creating liquidity mismatches. I don't say that this is a general rule, but we should look closely at this part of financial intermediation. It's what you just saw on the radar, that probably non-banks are to be monitored more closely than banks or insurance.
Great, thank you for filling that in. So the policy rate in the euro area today, the marginal policy rate, is minus 0.5%. How low can that rate go before we start seeing businesses and households hoarding cash, which pays zero?
First, we don't see it at all. And second, if you allow me, can I ask the question in a somewhat different way?
Sure.
For me, the key question is not a figure which would trigger hoarding. It's whether banks pass on these negative rates they have on their excess reserves to their individual customers. Then we would have the question. But if I look at households, or if I look at SMEs in France, and in the euro area as a whole, banks don't pass on negative rates to their individual depositors. So at present, we don't have this question. It's a case for large corporates, but it's a completely different story because large corporates will not get banknotes.
Right.
And they have also negative funding rates in some cases. It's a case for financial institutions, but again, it's a different story. But I focus on households and SMEs. So far, we don't have the question. and I already had the opportunity to say that we expect this situation to remain as it is in France.
Okay. So you mentioned the low profitability of European banks as a concern. What accounts for that rate of profit for European banks, and what can and should policy do about it?
There are probably three different elements about this issue of profitability of European banks. But let me say, perhaps as a general remark, that if you look at figures on return on equity, obviously the US banks have a much better situation with, as an average, a low double-digit return on equity. If I look at the other banks, be they British, Japanese, or European, the figure is about the same, 6, 7, 8%. So it's not a specific URA situation. Having said that, we cannot be satisfied with this figure. It doesn't mean we have to go back to the return on equity 15% we had before the crisis. We must be consistent. If we increase the level of equity, and we more than doubled it, if we reduce the risk-free rate due to accommodative monetary policy, the cost of equity cannot be the same, and the expectation on return of equity cannot be to go back to the pre-crisis level. This would even be dangerous. But we cannot be satisfied with the present level, and so there are usually three candidates for explanation. The first one is monetary policy. And if you listen to European banks, it's probably the same in other jurisdictions, including Japan. Banks tend to say, this is the fault of monetary policy. It deserves serious caveats. First, because if you look at the effect of monetary policy, negative rates can have a negative effect on bank margin, as I said. But if you look at monetary policy as a whole, it has also some positive sides. It reduces the level of risk very significantly due to the improvement of the economic situation. It creates capital gains. They are one-off, but they are significant. It also increases the volume of credits, as I said. If you look all in all, our calculation at present is that the total effect of monetary policy on banks' profitability is neutral. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't look at it, we shouldn't introduce steering, as said, but it's neutral. The two other candidates are restructuration and digitalization. And obviously, digitalization is a technological revolution, especially for retail banks, which put pressure on their revenues and which increase the level of required investment. So, at least in the short term, it has a negative effect on profitability. And restructuration is the fact that possibly the costs are still too high, but for sure, the size is still too small. If I put together these two last factors, digitalization and restructuration, there is an urgent need for cross-border banks consolidation in the euro area. If you are larger, you have the same investment need for digitalization because these are fixed costs monthly, but you can use them on a much broader basis of revenue. And so, to give you a very simple figure, which explains part of the European banks' profitability problem, if I take the 5 most European American banks after consolidation, they have in this country a market share of more than 40%. If I take the 5 most important European banks in the euro area, they have a market share of less than 20%. And their cross-border dimension is limited, to say the least. This says very clearly that one of the answers to the bank profitability issue we have is a consolidation process, and if possible, cross-border, because this would bring a circulation cross-border of private savings, which have positive stabilization effects.
You know, it reminds me, many years ago, Ottmar Issing once said to me, shortly after the euro area was created, that there are no German banks, there are no French banks, there are only euro area banks. I'm guessing he was hoping that was true, but maybe it will be.
Otmar Issing has been a very useful founding father of the euro, including the inflation aim, close to but below 2%. This is Otmar Issing's also child.
Well, that actually brings us to the next question. There's been a discussion in many countries, including this one, about whether the 2% inflation target, or close to but below 2%, might be too low in a world with relatively slow growth and lower real interest rates. Do you think that the inflation target in the euro area is too constricting in some sense? Would it be better to have a different kind of target for achieving price stability?
I could first say, as a general remark, that about this question of the inflation target, there are very different views. To oversimplify the debate, but I will try to be more precise later, you hear people saying you should have an inflation aim of 4% in order never to hit the effective lower bound, or you should take into account this inflationary process and forces which are at work in our economies, and 2% is too high. I will not quote names, but there are very famous names on both sides of the spectrum. To be more precise, and perhaps more operational, first, this will be probably an important dimension of the review of our monetary policy framework announced by Christine Lagarde. So none of us should conclude the discussion before it has started. And this would be my cautious advice. To give you perhaps a personal feeling, but it's only a feeling before this debate starts, I don't think at this stage that our main problem is the close to below 2%. It's quite clear it's between 1.7 and 1.9%, so there is little ambiguity about the level. Probably we have to enhance the symmetry element of the aim. There can possibly have been some doubts about the fact that this objective was symmetric. And there could be interpretations from ECB watchers saying you had an implicit ceiling. I think we corrected this bias, but perhaps not strongly enough. But let me stress one important change in our monetary statement, what we call our introductory statement, which is our common declaration, last July. And I brought it here. I will not read the whole introductory statement. It's a 3-page, I reassure you. But we said, and we reiterated it in September, that we stand ready to adjust all of our instruments as appropriate to ensure that inflation moves towards our aim in a sustained manner, in line with our commitment to symmetry. These last words are new. Our commitment to symmetry. It must be very clear. There is no ceiling, and we are symmetric in our objective.
Great. The question has come up. You spoke in your opening remarks saying the decisions of September are behind us. We're all committed to going forward. The question here is that's being posed is how will President Lagarde act in order to ensure that cohesion going forward between central banks that might have had different views about the September decisions?
This is a question for President Lagarde, no problem. No, I'm not, to give you my personal feeling, I'm not especially worried about that. And I think that the discussion in September has been overstated. I regret what happened afterwards. But it's legitimate and necessary to have a technical discussion. I was part of it, as said. Having said that, there is no doubt about the decision-making process. And let me stress these 3 elements of consensus which I stressed. We all agree to maintain an accommodative monetary policy because it's needed. It's needed in this environment of slowdown and low inflation. We welcome the strategic review on the monetary policy framework. And third, and this was a very strong message by Mario Draghi, we expect, we wish, we desire that fiscal support will be increased by European governments in the next future. Let me focus a bit on this last dimension, if you allow me. And Mario made this message extremely clear on September the 12th, just after this governing council. If I put it in my own words, we have done our monetary duty. We will go on doing it. It's now up to other economic authorities to do also their part. If I try to be more specific, there is already a fiscal relaxation in the euro area. Everybody focuses on the German debate. It's not obvious for the various political reasons we know. But if you look at the fiscal stance in the euro area, it was, you know what is a fiscal stance? You take away the cyclical element, so you look at the evolution of the structural balance. It was neutral broadly last year, 2018. It's now loosening with a fiscal expansion structural of 0.3, 0.4% of euro area GDP. And I might perhaps surprise you, it's the same figure for Germany. So Germany has to deliver its commitment, but there is also a fiscal easing in Germany. But as a whole, there is a significant fiscal easing in the euro area. We will see what happens next year, but the magnitude should be at least the same. And I mentioned the interesting example of the Dutch fiscal policy, which is seen as a serious country, but they use the fiscal tool. So we will see what happens. This debate is always complicated because we have one single monetary authority and 19 fiscal authorities. But if you take the euro area as a whole, there is a fiscal move in the right direction. Last consideration on that, I mentioned it very shortly. I mentioned figures. So I mentioned the quantitative part of the debate. I often regret that the qualitative part of the debate doesn't play a stronger role in all of our democracies. I don't know which country you come from, you students here, from the US, from European countries, from Asia. I don't know if any of you comes from a country where there is a qualitative public debate about fiscal policy. What are the most useful expenditures for the future? Are they for your generation or are they for pensioners? What are the most useful investment? Is it only infrastructure, which is very useful, or is it research, investment, or energy transition? What are the strongest multipliers for growth, including the stabilization function? Is it increasing expenditures, current expenditures or investment, or is it tax cuts? If you hear some public debate in your country about that, please tell us. It would be hope. Because these are probably the most important questions we have to deal with in fiscal policies. I strongly hope we can have this kind of debate in my country or in other European countries. And believe me, it would help the quantitative part of the debate. Because everybody is focusing on the level of structural balance or of nominal balance. But it's not the same to have a deficit of, say, 1% if you have chosen the right expenditures for the futures. It's not the same for your debt to GDP journey in the years to come. And here we clearly need economists to investigate more about that and the policy-making debate to use economic research. This is a very strong wish I expressed tonight at NIU. Can I call it the NIU wish or something like that? The NIU call. But look at your countries. In each of our countries, it's really disappointing.
Forgive me for turning to this question, but in the United States, you know that President Trump has been rather critical of the Federal Reserve, the central bank. Yes,
really?
From time to time.
I cannot believe it. No, sir.
And he's not limited his criticism of central banks to the Federal Reserve, and he's mentioned others, including the ECB, and suggested that the ECB has been manipulating the euro to make it weaker and to hurt U.S. exports. How does that reverberate in Europe when you hear that? How do you view that when you hear that claim that the ECB is manipulating the euro?
If I dare saying it this way, it doesn't reverberate much. But let me only explain why. It's very clear. We are not targeting the exchange rate. We are targeting price stability, which is, as you reminded, very clearly defined, close to below 2%. And this is not only what we say, it's our mandate by law. More than by law, by the treaty. We are independent, but we have a mandate. And this is, for me, probably the key answer to the many critics of independence. I will not quote any of them, including the most famous one. I could understand that there is a criticism on independence if the mandate is not clear. If I am independent on everything, I can speak about fiscal policy and decide about fiscal policy or about labor market rules. These are very political questions. I can express my opinion, but I'm not the decision maker. But on my mandate, which is price stability, I am independent because I have to deliver. And we don't target exchange rates. It's even a multilateral commitment, one of the strong multilateral commitment which remain. I hope we will repeat it in the IMF session in 2 days in Washington, but I quote you the existing commitments of our last multilateral meetings. We clearly said, including the American authorities, including the Chinese authorities, including the euro area, we don't target our exchange rates for competitive purposes. So, as said, for strong internal political reason, our mandate, and also for multilateral reason, there is no issue about it.
Thank you. Countries around the world are figuring out how they wish to replace LIBOR. And they're doing it in different ways. The United States, we've begun to adopt SOFR, a secured overnight funding rate, as a substitute for LIBOR, as a reference rate. The euro area is introducing a bank reference rate that includes bank credit risk. What are the advantages and disadvantages of using such a bank reference rate?
This is a very technical question. I don't know if everybody in the room is aware of this debate about reference rates, but it's a very important one for the credibility of the financial transactions. Our choice in the euro area has been to replace EONIA, let's say, if I look at the overnight, the shortest index rate, to replace EONIA with what we call Euroster or Ester, which remains indexed on interbank transactions, and we didn't go as far as going to the risk-free transactions, so the repo markets. And this is a different choice from the American or the British one. Let me only explain why in our context. First, we thought that it was a stronger continuity with the existing EONIA. And there is for us a very clear link between EONIA and Ester. There is a difference of 8.5 basis points. And second, in our case, we thought that the interbank money rate was a better image of the funding condition of the real economy, due to the fact that I mentioned at the start that our economy is mainly funded through the bank channel. And believe me, it works. We introduced this Euroster or Ester on October the 1st, and it went completely nominal, as expected. If I can quote my colleague and friend Benoît Cœuré of the ECB board, he said, It was at the start of October. Our money market is quite nice to see. I don't know if you can admire a money market, but it's nice to see.
So the good news is it's boring, and we don't have to worry.
I think you don't have to worry. We have to monitor this transition because there is, on both sides of the Atlantic, and whatever new indexes you choose, there is a very important stock effect, meaning that many existing contracts are indexed on the former LIBOR on EONIA in our case. So you have to manage the transition, but I'm confident we will succeed.
I think we have time for one more. Let me just pose a question that isn't on our list, but I think it's something you've been thinking about and speaking about. Namely, to what extent and how should central banks take account of climate change in making policy?
No, I think this is also a very important question. If I have 3 minutes, not more.
Please.
We took the initiative at the Banque de France to initiate a network of supervisors and central banks for greening the financial system. This is a precise acronym, NGFS, Network for Greening the Financial System. We launched it in Paris about 2 years ago. It was December 2017. I don't know if you remember, at that time, the United States, unfortunately, went out of the Paris Agreement on climate, and President Macron decided to have a so-called One Planet Summit in Paris. So we initiated this network, and at the start we were 8 supervisors, which was a good start, including many European central banks, because Europe takes the lead clearly on this part. We are now about 50 central bank and supervisors and international organizations, including the IMF, as observer. And believe me, it's a coalition of the willing. Believe me, I never saw in my professional career such an enthusiasm, such an energy around the table to change things. It can seem probably to many of you a bit paradoxical and surprising to speak of central bankers and supervisors as enthusiastic, but we are indeed on this issue, and we can be very energetic. What do we say and what do we do? To put it in a nutshell. First, as supervisors, that climate risk is part of the financial risk in the long run. If you are a bank, and if you have, let's say, brown assets, if you finance the coal industry, your short-term financial risk is perhaps limited, but your long-term transition risk is very significant. So we should monitor it as supervisors. We should encourage disclosure of the existing climate risk, and this is the FSB task force chaired by Michael Bloomberg. You are probably aware of that. But we should do more than that. So this is a snapshot of risk. But we should also study what I call the video of risk. That is to say, these are long-term risks, so we should use stress tests, forward-looking stress tests, to know what the risk will be in 10 years or 20 years and incorporate them now. We know how stress tests work for economic and financial scenarios. We have to elaborate about climate-related stress risk through their financial or economic effects. It's a heavy task, but it's one of the priorities of the NGFS. Last word about monetary policy. This is a financial stability part of our mandate. Last word about monetary policy. We are only at the start of our reflection, and this will be clearly one of Christine Lagarde's priorities. What we think is that we have probably to do at least 2 things. First, on the strategic level, we have to incorporate climate risk and its macroeconomic effect in our economic forecast and models in the long run. We know that this risk is certain. It's a long-term risk, probably a stagflationary one, increasing inflation and decreasing growth. We have to incorporate it. This is a strategic part. And the other tool in the operational field, you know that monetary policy is about collateral. We take collateral to lend money to banks or financial intermediaries. We assess the value of this collateral, and we can apply haircut. When we assess the value of this collateral, we should also incorporate the climate risk of this collateral, which is very consistent with what I said about financial stability. We are at the start of this reflection, but very consistently with our mandate of price stability, again, we should take into account climate change in monetary policy. And again, it's a very promising avenue, but it's not in order to get politicized or fashionable. It's part of our mandate.
I hope you'll join me in thanking the governor today. I had promised the governor that we would finish by 6 p.m. We failed our mandate by 3 minutes, so maybe next time. I hope you will. I hope. Sorry.
Symmetric mandate.
Symmetric, exactly. I hope
And
you will.
can I tell you a small story, if you
Sure.
allow me? I was looking at the clock for another reason. Kim, I don't know if you are aware. We have a governing council about monetary policy matters next week in Frankfurt. And so we have a so-called silent period. Mervyn, you are very, you know the issue very well. And my silent period about, in European Central Time, it's midnight now. So my silent period has started 3 minutes ago.
Thank you very much.